Man, Happy New Year. It's great to be with you this morning, and I'm so excited about the new series that we're diving into today. It's How Can I Know There's a God? And then after we go from here next week to how do I know the Bible is true? In other words, if we believe that there's a God, how does that God communicate with us? And then how do I know Christianity is right? How can I know that God is good when there's so much suffering that's going on in the world? And then important one to finish up the series, how can I know that I'm going to heaven when I die? These are questions that so many people have. Well, today I want to ask you to really think. Whatever it takes for you to put your brain in gear, I want you to commit to really turning that brain on and thinking as deeply as you can, because we often are not accustomed to doing that. We so often live our lives driven by our feelings. And our culture would say, do what makes you feel good. What do you feel in your gut? Well, sometimes our feelings and our gut can lead us the wrong way. Our feelings are important, but they are not strong enough. They don't provide a strong enough foundation for you or for me to build our lives upon. Let me give you an illustration. Let's imagine that you are having a perfectly awesome day. You know, there's no sun or ice like there is out there now, but there's no snow. There's sunshine, and it's a beautiful blue sky, and things are going great, and you have your hand around the threshold or the frame of your car door, and your grandson slams the door before you move your hand. It only catches one little finger, right? But what happens to your day? Your whole day is gone, okay? Or you're having a great night's sleep and you stumble to the bathroom and you stub your toe on something and your feelings have totally changed. You need something stronger than your feelings, and I need something stronger than my feelings upon which to build my life. We need something that does not change that quickly. Someone was sharing with me just as they came in about just a really challenging time in the life of their family just within the last week or so. See, I don't know exactly what's going to ahead for you in 2024, but I do know this. You'll have some good days. Amen? You also will have some uncertain days, and some of you, most all of us, will have some really bad days. And so we need something solid on which to build our lives. We need some foundational beliefs that will carry us through those times. Now, according to Gallup, 9 out of 10 Americans believe that there is a God. 9 out of 10. Worldwide, that percentage is a bit less. It's somewhere over 50% worldwide believe in God. But here's the question. Do they really believe in God, or do they believe in a God that they have created in their own minds? Because I would tend to think that if 9 out of 10 people believed in God, wouldn't their behavior be a bit different than it is? So what do we do with that? You see, I think that many of us here, if we're honest, we're honest with ourselves, can say we have honest doubts, or have had at some point honest doubts about the existence of God. I would contend that perhaps the only people who have never had a doubt are those who have never thought a thought, because it's natural for us. It's natural for us to question and to not understand. And the encouraging thing I see that is as I read the New Testament, if someone ever approached Jesus with an honest question, he never turned them away. Jesus was always open to honest questions, to honest inquiry, and I believe that's how he views my doubts and your doubts today. So today and over the next few weeks, we're going to look at some sincere questions, and we hope to give you some solid answers. So why do we doubt the existence of God? I would say, first of all, what Robert Jeffress has written there, that we suffer from natural doubt. It's kind of natural for us. It's hard for us to believe in someone who is invisible. Even though there may be evidence, think about our experience of the tooth fairy or Santa Claus. Many people have had those beliefs really trashed. And so what do we do with that? How do we believe in someone that we cannot see, have not seen? Now, I think God empathizes with that, and he understands when we have doubt. I found this short verse in Jude 22 that I'd forgotten was there. It says, "Be merciful to those who doubt." So I think when you and I have honest doubts, God understands, he empathizes, and I think he is ready and willing to sort of receive that. Secondly, we have philosophical doubt. Some people doubt the existence of God on the grounds that they say that there's too much suffering, and they deny the existence of God because of the reality of evil in our world. Now, that is a very important question. We're going to invest one whole week as it relates to that particular question. So I want you to, take note of that on the schedule and come back for that. So that's an honest doubt. Some people have experiential doubt. Not all of us grew up in homes who believed in God. And all of us tend to be prisoners of our own experience. Some of us have been disappointed by God. Some of us have gone through the loss of a child or the betrayal of a spouse or abuse by a parent. And many times we have unanswered prayers. And so that can lead to doubt in our lives. Sometimes we have spiritual doubt. I think sometimes we think that people who don't believe in God are intellectual giants. That anybody who doesn't believe in God, they have examined all of the philosophical and scientific evidence for God, and after much deliberation, they have concluded that he cannot exist. But in reality, what I've observed, most people who have rejected the idea of God have rejected God based on spiritual issues rather than intellectual issues. Look what Romans 1 says. "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." So if the evidence is as overwhelming as the scripture says that it is, why do people ignore the evidence? The Apostle Paul goes on, he says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to them, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened." You see, even though many people deny the existence of God, even though we are surrounded by an incredible evidence to the reality that he exists, many people intentionally reject that knowledge. Why? Because you see, if there is a divine creator who made us, then it's only reasonable for us to conclude that we must submit to him, that we should live the way that creator calls upon us to live, and some people just do not want to live that way. They say, "I have a better idea than what God does." And so they have deliberately rejecting that. And very often they don't deliberately just reject it, they replace God with something else. Romans 1 continues. "Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles." Some people have created God in their own image. Instead of God creating human beings in their image, many people have created a God that is more manageable, more intellectually understandable for them, and that is not the God of the Bible. And so sometimes people have not just rejected God, but they have created their own God, which is different, and they have created God in their image. Why else do we doubt? I think sometimes we have empirical doubt. We can be intimidated by educators, by scientists, and we think that they are smarter than the rest of us. And so therefore, because scientists don't believe in God, then our belief in God must be rooted in some sort of a foolish belief in myths or in fables. But in fact, you have to ask yourself the question, which came first? The scientist's belief in science, or a spiritual issue that caused the scientist to doubt? When I was in college, it was the farthest thing from my brain to become a pastor. I studied physiological psychology, and what that is, that's a psychology that studies the brain. It studies the eyes and the ears and the nervous system, how we see, how we hear, the mechanisms that are in place for nerves to conduct the messages that they need to conduct. And so we studied biology and chemistry, and that really was my focus. And I used what was known as the scientific method. Anybody heard the scientific method? What the scientific method says is that only what can be observed and measured in nature can qualify as a scientific explanation for why things are the way they are. And the scientific method is based on naturalism. Say naturalism. And that's based on the assumption that nature is all there is. That the universe is a closed system, and so anything that happens in nature has to originate in nature because it's a closed system. In the scientific method, there is no allowance for the possibility that some things can only be explained by something that is above nature or something that is outside of nature that we would call supernatural. So using the scientific method, people automatically predispose themselves to say there is no God, because it can only be what I can see, what I can hear, what I can understand, what I can measure. Now, no matter how well-meaning, there's a huge fallacy there. You see, if you're a naturalist, you cannot allow for a supernatural explanation for everything. Now stay with me, because but if you pull this together, it'll be a great revelation. You see, the scientists who base their reasoning on naturalism says this: God cannot be the answer of the universe because my belief system does not allow for the existence of a God who could create the universe. You follow that as circular reasoning, and it's intellectually bankrupt. They have automatically imposed on themselves a severe limitation to what is honest intellectual inquiry. So there are two groups of people. Everybody in this room, every person in the world falls into these two categories. They are either a naturalist, say naturalist, or they are supernaturalist. What that means is they are either theists who believe in God or non-theists who don't. There are only two options. And so we're going to look at today, and what I want to do is I want to present to you some arguments for you to consider. Now understand, nobody can 100%, with 100% factual certainty, prove that there is a God. Nobody can. But understand, nobody with 100% factual certainty can prove that there is not a God. You hear me? Either way. And so what we're going to look at is let's examine some evidence. Now, we're just going to be presenting the surface of these arguments. And so you can do some digging on your own. Google can be your friend, and you can research some of this stuff, and you can read as long as you would like, because there is some incredible evidence that is coming to fore more and more as scientists and physicists continue to study all this stuff. So here's some arguments for you to consider. Okay, first one: why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there something? Look around at all this stuff. Look around at all the people. When you leave today and you drive home, why is there all that stuff, all those buildings, all those trees, all that nature stuff, the lake, the street? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why are we seeing all that stuff? Or why are we seeing at all? You see, the existence of the vast universe all around us strongly suggests that someone brought something into existence at some time out of nothing. Consider the immensity of our universe. My brain tilts when they start adding all of those zeros, and I run out of room, and I mix up billions and trillions and all of this stuff. But understand, we exist in the Milky Way galaxy, right? That consists of at least 100 billion stars, they say, and the average distance between each of those stars is 30 trillion miles. Now let me put that. One writer has put that in something that my mind can grasp a little bit. Norman Geisler. He said, let's imagine that you got into a decommissioned space shuttle for a travel through our Milky Way galaxy. That's the biggest thing that we look up at every night. And that space shuttle flew at 17,000 miles per hour, or 5 miles every second. It would take you 201,450 years to travel to the first star. And there are billions and billions of stars. Where did it all come from? Where did it come from? You see, the vast majority of scientists, whether they are believers or whether they are not, they actually will concede that the universe had a beginning, that there was a moment of creation. The scientific theory for that, they call the Big Bang, right? It's not just a sitcom, okay? The Big Bang Theory, it actually exists. And scientists can trace it back to there was a point in time where the universe started. It had to come from somewhere. If we would say, as some do, that the universe created itself, that's just absurd, because then that means that the universe had to both exist and not exist at exactly the same time. And that nothing caused everything. I mean, just think about that. It makes no intellectual sense. Now let's imagine, how many of you know how to play dominoes? Play dominoes? Instead of playing the game, did you ever set them up, kind of in rows, and then you push one and the whole rows fall down? I, like you, have seen some pretty amazing displays of people who set up thousands and thousands of dominoes, right? They'll start in this room and they'll go to the other room, and they'll be amazingly beautiful geometric designs, and as the dominoes all fall. But we all know that for that to really look how it's supposed to look, somebody has to push what? The first domino. Somebody has to start it. Somebody has to even make the dominoes. You see, to assert that the entire universe came from nothing, and because of nothing, and had no beginning, it's nonsensical. Nothing can arise, nothing can begin without a cause. It cannot just spontaneously happen. Now, those of us who believe in God, we believe that God created everything ex nihilo. Say ex nihilo. What that means is out of nothing. God didn't just go into his workshop and see all of this stuff sort of laying around and say, okay, give me some of this and some of that, and build from what was already there. He created it from nothing. He is the one who pushed the first domino. He's the one who created the dominoes to push. There's an old joke about God and Satan having a contest. They were talking to some humans, and they said, okay, we got to decide who's most powerful here. And so they said, okay, let's create something. So God reached down, scooped up some dirt, and he threw it up into the sky and created all of the stars. And Satan said, oh, that's no big deal. I can do that. And Satan bent over to pick up dirt, and God said, wait a minute, get your own dirt. From nothing. The first argument is, why is there anything at all if there's no creator? The evidence that scientists have discovered now is overwhelming, and even the vast, vast, vast majority of scientists, whether they believe in Jesus or not, they assert that there was a beginning, that it started somewhere. Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky is proclaimed the work of his hands. Astronaut John Glenn, when he was allowed to fly in the space shuttle at age 77, he looked out the window and he said, to look at all this kind of creation and not believe in God is to me impossible. Second argument for you to consider: how do you explain the complex design of the universe? How do you explain the complexity of everything? You see, scientists or people who would be naturalists would say, oh, it just happened. It just sort of came together by themselves. Now understand, they would say it was just by random. But understand this, and think about this. Scientists say they base their belief on the scientific method, right? Which says that there are orderly things that happen in nature that we can count on, that are repeatable and that they are observable. Yet they would say their alternative theory is based on just randomness in a universe that they say contains order and not chaos. But yet they say it started from chaos. Folks, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. It's either the product of a creator who designed the universe to run according to observable, repeatable laws. Think about how complex nature is. The incredible complexity that even made the Big Bang possible. If the expansion of the universe were going any faster, we would just spin off into nothing. If it were going any slower, we would not exist. The incredible complexity. Or how about Earth? People have said there are so many conditions necessary. It's almost like somebody laid out a biological welcome mat for human beings, a planet uniquely created. William Dembski has written, imagine that you're walking in the mountains and you come across a cabin in the mountains, and you see that there's a light on in the cabin, and you go into the cabin and the fire is in the hearth, and you realize that your favorite TV program is on there, and you open up the refrigerator and all of your favorite foods are in there, and all of your favorite books and DVDs and videos and whatever, it's all there for you, and you would come to the conclusion that somebody must be waiting for you to come, right? Somebody must have been getting ready for you. Some people would say, as you look at the earth, it's almost like God threw out the welcome mat for you and me to live. See, if the earth were smaller or larger, it wouldn't have the proper atmosphere to support life for you and me. If the earth were any farther away from the sun, we would freeze. If the earth were any closer to the sun, we would burn up. Think about the existence of water. Our body's 2/3 of water, something that's chemically neutral, that has been uniquely and exquisitely formed so it can carry all the vitamins and minerals and the things that you and I need to all different parts of our bodies so that we can function and that we can live. And the water is salt water in the oceans, but somehow there's a system that it evaporates and goes into the clouds, and then it falls as rain that is not saltwater rain onto the earth so that you and I can live and grow. Who made that? Our atmosphere made up of just the right amount of oxygen. Higher percentage of oxygen, we'd have spontaneous combustion. There would be fires everywhere. Lower percentage of oxygen, you and I could not breathe and we could not live. Life would be impossible. Consider the cell. Just one cell. Our bodies are made up of millions and millions of cells, but consider just one. Where did that come from? How did it start? Well, most people don't realize is Charles Darwin, he wrote about the demise of his theory, even though most people just don't buy it now. Darwin wrote this, quote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." And his theory does break down. You see, what evolution wants to explain is how one cell came into existence. And they would say, okay, there is some ammonia and some nitrogen and oxygen and all this stuff, and it's in this primordial soup, and lightning struck it, and it just sort of came to life for one cell. That's one cell. Think about your eyes. The complexity of the human body. Just the way that you and I see is just one of thousands of systems in our body. Our eyes, there's this ball and it has a lens on it, and there's a sensitive retina clear in the back, with rods and cones that enables us to see light, and the light enters there and it excites the rods and the cones in just the right amount so we can distinguish between the faces of different people and the colors and all of that, but it's not done. It has to go back through a whole series of nerves back into the optic chiasm and back into your brain, and then it needs to be understood so you know what you are seeing. And then your eyes even have windshield wipers, your eyelids that keep it clean. The incredible complexity. And that's just one system. And you see, one of the things that you can't explain is that all those systems came into being at the same time. So many people would say, just given long enough, all of this stuff would grow. But you realize that for life to happen, all of those systems had to be in place, and all of them had to be functioning at exactly the same time. How do you explain you? Psalm 14 says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." So how do you explain you? How do you explain the reality of how you are even able to think? How do we explain our consciousness? How do we explain those ideas? Now, let's just accept for a moment, let's just accept it as fact that yes, okay, in a primordial soup that Darwin talked about, that there could be some ammonia and some nitrogen and oxygen, and that one lightning bolt might have hit and spurred a spark that got a chemical reaction going. How do you explain the multiple systems? How do you explain RNA and DNA? How do you explain that the cell replicates itself? How do you explain that the cell builds nourishment? Where does each individual cell get its energy? How did it all start, and how does it keep going? Not just amino acids, how do all of the proteins come together and are functioning and operational from the very beginning? For you and I to understand and believe that we came from one cell, we would have to believe that if you went up to the landfill, where they take all of our garbage every week and it takes out there, they put it in this huge landfill and they cover it over with dirt, and we have to believe that over 1 billion years out of that eventually would come a 747. That's what they want us to believe, and the human body is far more complex than an airplane. Or if you can imagine, you remember back when watches were made up of dials and they had little intricate gears and everything inside of them. Do you remember that? Imagine taking a whole watch apart and putting it in a bag and shaking up the pieces and saying, if I just shook it long enough, it would all come together to be a perfectly operating watch. Do you believe that would ever happen? Your body and the human race is so much more complicated than that. The only reasonable explanation is God. You see, without God, there is no objective morality. If there is no God, if there is no creator, then every single one of us can just act the way we want to act. The presence of objective morality, the presence of the reality that you and I believe there is a right or wrong, is evidence for God. You see, objective morality would not exist if God didn't exist. There is objective reality, and therefore God has to exist. If there's not an objective reality that is put there by a creator, then that means that you get to do what you want to do, and I get to do what I want to do, and right and wrong is nothing more than personal preference. And what that would mean is that you and I have no basis to say it's wrong to rape a child. Nobody could say it's wrong for me to take your stuff. You see, if you remove the reality of a creator, there is no objective morality. It all comes down to biological randomness. And you see, our culture is often wrong. Remember, there was a time not too long ago when people said that it was legal and it was right for one group of human beings to own other human beings. Remember? Slavery. Our culture often gets it wrong. One more. Why do people find God if he doesn't exist? Now, this is the weakest one empirically. I will grant you that. But think about the millions and millions and millions of people who have been followers of Jesus when they got no benefit from it. Think about those who have been persecuted over and over again, who pursued a personal relationship with God in spite of great personal sacrifice that it entailed. You see, the 12 disciples, they weren't looking for the resurrection. The 50 people who observed Jesus alive after his death, they weren't looking for him. You know, if you read the Bible or historians of that time, nowhere do you find they were camping out at the tomb waiting for Jesus to come out. Yet they all attested to that. And down through the years, even though people have tried to stamp out the reality of Christianity, even though every single one of the apostles died horrible deaths except for John. John was placed in a pot of boiling oil, and somehow he survived that. How do you explain the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of martyrs to this day who are dying for their faith in Jesus? Hebrews describes that. It says there were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about it in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes on the ground. And more than 2,000 years later, that's still happening. So we have a choice. We have a choice. Everybody does. The bottom line question, does God exist or does God not exist? That's the answer, the question that we have to answer. And then we have to live with the implications of our answer. We have to ask ourselves, does the evidence that we see, does it support the reality of our Creator or does it not? Our answer has serious consequences either direction. I would contend that to conclude there's not a God requires one of two things to happen. First of all, somebody has to put their brain into neutral. They just have to refuse. Or second, they have to refuse to look at the evidence. So many people have just closed their eyes because if they believed in God, their behavior, their attitudes, their thoughts would have to change. That's the choice before us. I did not write this. I remembered it, and I would give the person credit if I could remember who wrote it. They said, for the atheist to dismiss this evidence means he must slide into eternity with his fingers crossed, hoping he was right. We believe that there is a God, and we believe that he has reached out to us in many, many ways, and one of the biggest ways is through the presence of Jesus Christ. And we remember how Jesus Christ has given to us a